In the last 12 months I've been sailing the East Caribbean. This video is made to help you on your way to sail the East Caribbean with your own sailboat. I'm a first-time boat owner who knew nothing about sailing before starting out. It took me years to understand the basics of sailing, as many teaching materials were just too complicated to understand for me as a beginner. I made this video to help people who are like me when I started out, who have the dream to do it one day and are trying to figure it all out. After a year of crewing across the Pacific Ocean on other people's boats, 2 years ago I set off on a full-time sailing journey, sailing mostly solo from Guatemala to Honduras, Cuba, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Grenada, St. Vincent the Grenadines, Martinique, Dominica, Guadeloupe, Antigua, St. Martin, St. Kitts, back down again to Grenada, back up again to St. Kitts, and in the meanwhile I have also done my Yacht Masters offshore certification. The East Caribbean is not always an easy place to sail, but after this video you should have the tools to do it yourself comfortably and safely. One of the joys of travel is to do sightseeing and explore new cultures. That is going to be your job. This video is a practical guide on how to sail the East Caribbean, to get you on your way to do just that. I might add in a couple recommendations here and there. If you want to see the sightseeing videos, you can scroll through earlier videos I made. As most of you sailing the East Caribbean will first arrive in either Grenada or St. Martin, I want to explain these two places a little more in depth as others, so that you will have an easy start of your journey. Once you have physically experienced one island in the East Caribbean, you'll see that traveling in the other islands will be a lot easier, as there are a lot of similarities. After explaining some basics about arriving in either St. Martin or Grenada, together we are going to sail a route from Grenada all the way up to St. Martin, stopping at a bunch of places in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Martinique, Dominica, Guadeloupe, Antigua, and in the end St. Martin, where during this route I will talk about how to do it and all the different challenges I have faced. Let's quickly get familiar with your arriving location. Arriving in St. Martin. St. Martin is half French and half Dutch or Netherlands. The majority of people go to the French side to check in Marigot. Even though I am from the Netherlands, I still go to the French side to check in because it's cheaper. Here you can drop anchor or take a mooring buoy. Now we need to check into the country. Check-in is either free or €2, depending on where you do it. The route I show you is exactly from the place where I anchor my boat. Every single route over the water that I'm going to show you in this video, you can download in the description of this video and use if you want to practice or actually use for your own trip. Of course, you can't hold me reliable for any mistake, but these are the exact routes that I have done myself. From the anchorage you can take the dinghy here to Isle Marine, where it's free to check in. Or you can take the dinghy under the bridge to Island Waterworld and check in for €2. Sometimes there's an advantage to pay €2 at Island Waterworld if Isle Marine is closed, for an example. Normally, to check into a country you need your clearance from your last port, your boat registration and your passport. And sometimes you need to do something online before you arrive. But not in the French islands. They are the easiest islands to check in and out of the whole Caribbean. You check in yourself at a computer. It's very easy and uncomplicated and usually takes about 5 minutes. Now you're checked in and you can go officially on land. I'm taking you on a short adventure so that you'll be more prepared for your arrival. You dinghy over to the dinghy dock, which is next to the ferry terminal. Marigot is a really nice town to walk around. I certainly recommend stopping at La Chevenante French Bakery. St. Martin is one of the cheapest islands for groceries with a huge assortment. A little frustrating is that it's quite a walk to the big supermarkets, the Super U. A taxi from the dinghy dock or a big bag on wheels would be ideal. The next thing I want you to see are the massive marine stores here. From this main road we could take a local minibus. bus is $1.50, which will take us about 10 minutes to where the big marine stores are. But we are going to take the dinghy because I need to show you something else. With the dinghy we're going back to Ile Marine where we checked in, and then we're going under the bridge. This bridge opens twice per day at 8:30 in the morning and at 5 in the afternoon. Times are mentioned amongst others in the Navionics app. This is not important for your dinghy because you can always go under it. But if you want to go with your sailboat inside the lagoon, you can enter and exit twice a day. The advantage is that it's very central in the lagoon between the Dutch and the French side, and it's extremely quiet to sleep as there are no waves. The disadvantage is that the water is a little less nice to swim in. Be careful, it's really shallow after you enter through the French bridge, so with your sailboat you have to stay on the line as seen in Navionics. And also, deep draft boats cannot enter on the French side into the lagoon. They can enter on the Dutch side, but it's going to cost you about $40 to go through their bridge, so your sailboat can go through it. Continuing by dinghy, we go about 1.5 miles under the next bridge, where the Dutch side starts. And from here we can go to the big island water world or budget marine. These are the biggest stores with the best prices I have seen in any of the Caribbean islands. Also, you can take a 10-minute walk to the Ace Hardware, which is a gigantic Ace Hardware store. Last thing I want to mention is, if you are into partying, St. Martin is really the island to be. Friday the party is at Lagoonies, which is almost next to Island Waterworld, and Tuesday is Latin night at Soggy Dollar Bar. St. Martin is a wonderful island and I definitely recommend exploring many parts of the island. I hope this made your beginning into St. Martin a little easier. Before we start with the sailing part, the other half of you guys will arrive in Grenada. Grenada is basically 3 islands, but you can forget the middle one. For now at least, as no one lives there. The 2 main islands are Carriacou, and the main island is just called Grenada Main Island. There are only 2 places you can check into the country. In Carriacou, a region called Tyrrell Bay at Carriacou Marine, and in Grenada Main Island, in the capital St. George at the Port Louis Marine. You used to be able to check in on different locations in Grenada Main Island, like in the well-known Prickly Bay, but they closed that after COVID and kept it closed even up until now. But if you wish, you can check the current status of that. I prefer to check in at Carriacou Marine because when you arrive by boat for the first time in a new part of the world, you're tired and you don't know where to go, what to do, etc. You need a bit of sleep. And Carriacou is a massive area to drop anchor. Well, if you arrive in St. George, it's very deep and people either take a mooring buoy there, which in the season can all be taken, or pay for a slip in the marina. The anchor area in Grenada Main Island where most boats go to are the southern anchorages. Prickly Bay is where many people go to, but since you can't check in there at the moment, we're going to make life easy and we're going to arrive in Carriacou. After we drop anchor, we go in the dinghy to the dinghy dock from Carriacou Marine. Again, you can download this route if you wish in the description of this video. There's a big Tyrrell Bay marina on that side. This is the small one. It only does monohulls and no catamarans. And the customs is over there. Carriacou Marine. It is best if you have created an arrival notification on the Sail Clear website before arriving. If you haven't, it's just going to take a bit more time as you have to fill in an extra form. Plus, they will let the next one waiting in line going before you while you fill in the form, and then you have to wait until they finish with that. Normally 1 person from customs and 1 from immigration will be sitting here. Again, you have your clearance document from your previous port with you, your boat papers and your passport. You will first go to the immigration person to get a stamp in your passport, and then go to the customs person in the same building. It will be around 60 EC dollar or 20 US dollar, and you can pay by cash or credit cards. Nice, you're checked in. Welcome to Grenada. When I arrived there, I was amazed by the beautiful tropical trees and plants. In Carriacou there is a little budget marine store. If they don't have something that you need, they can order it from the big store in the big Grenada island. If you continue walking from budget marine to the little town about 5 minutes, there is a supermarket and there are ATMs. To my big surprise, the supermarket was open on Sunday. I got some chicken and some fresh bread over there. I'm going to explain a bit more about Grenada to give you a better feel of your first arrival point while we are doing our sailing trip. We're going to start our trip from Prickly Bay all the way in the south of Grenada to St. Vincent the Grenadines, Martinique, Dominica, Guadeloupe, Antigua and to St. Martin. The route you're seeing right now is the route I have done and has the exact anchorages I did in it. As I mentioned, you can download this route for your own use and also the separate routes we are going to do. In this video we are not going to stop at every single place you see here, because once you understand the basics of sailing the East Caribbean, you don't need me anymore for those easier sailing trips. Here you are on your boat in Prickly Bay on anchor. Prickly Bay is a little crowded, mostly because it's strategically a good place to be. Let me show you why. Before we go sailing, we dinghy over to the dinghy dock on the east side, where we fill up our diesel and our gasoline. Then we walk to the beer brewery to have a craft beer. Let's go back to the boat. Oh no, there's something broken on the boat. Let's quickly dinghy over to the other, bigger dinghy dock where the One Love Pizza restaurant is. And walk 1 minute to the big budget marine. They don't have the part we need. Okay, let's walk 5 minutes to the main road and take a local minibus for $1 to St. George, the capital of Grenada, which will take about 15 minutes to go to the big marine store of Island Waterworld. Okay, we have the part now. It's still really early in the morning. Let's continue with the minibus to the final bus station in town and take another bus to the Seven Sisters waterfall hike of 1.5 hours. One of the most beautiful tropical plants I've seen in my life. Alright, let's go back to the boat and start sailing north. I'm getting off 5 minutes before arrival at the dinghy dock at the Ace Hardware just to stock up on some last things. Tomorrow morning we set sail from Grenada north, but are we going to sail on the right side of Grenada or on the left side? 99% of the year the wind in the East Caribbean blows either from the northeast, the east or the southeast. The right side or east side of the island is called the windward side because here's where the wind blows towards the island. The left side or the west side of the island is called the leeward side because it is on the other side of the island from where the wind blows. What are the advantages and disadvantages of sailing on the right or left side? Because the leeward side, the side where the mountains and structures on the island stop most of the wind from blowing here, this is the calm and protected side of the island, and because of that, this is where the majority of anchorages are. Occasionally there are anchorages on the windward side, the rougher side of the island, but then it looks more like this. You have to navigate through a reef area to get to an area where you are at least protected from the waves from the ocean. Of course, on the other side of the island, you are protected from the waves because the island stops the waves. From this point of view, you would say it makes much more sense to sail on the leeward side because that's where all the anchorages are and thus where all the places are that you want to see. However, because the leeward side is so protected by the mountains, it also means that often there will be no wind. So if your plan is not to stop at more anchorages, maybe you have a flight from another island and you just want to go fast, you might be better off to go on the windward side because at least you have consistent wind there. I need to explain a little more about the challenge of sailing on the windward side later. The East Caribbean is like a half circle. This is north, east, south and west. The southernmost island being Grenada, going north, passing St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Martinique, Dominica, Guadeloupe, Montserrat, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Bart, St. Martin, USVI, BVI and Puerto Rico, and a bunch of smaller ones in between. As most people arrive either in Grenada or St. Martin, this is where we focus on in this video. The cruising season runs from the 1st December until the 1st of June. The height of hurricane season is between 15 August and late September. To be as safe as possible from hurricanes during hurricane season, you want ideally to be south of about St. Vincent. So what does this hurricane season really mean? In this picture you see that between 15 August and late September, the majority of storms and hurricanes are formed. I plan to do a whole separate video about weather, but for now I want you to understand why most people choose to sail between 1 December and 1 June, and why most people choose even between 1 June and mid-August and 1 October to 1 December to stay under about St. Vincent. Even though the chance of storms or a hurricane is still pretty low in these time frames. It's because during 1 December and 1 June the weather is quite stable. Outside of this time frame the weather becomes less stable. This has to do with a bigger difference in air temperature high in the sky versus low to the ground outside of this time frame. To show you how it is like sailing during unstable weather, I'm going to show you a part of a video I recently made where I on purpose decided to sail in June during days of unstable weather. Of course there are also days of stable weather in June, but not this specific week. Good morning. Today, from a weather perspective, it is not a good day to go out. There's gray clouds over there, definitely have rain in it, and also some unexpected winds. Sailing nicely at about 5.5 knots. That gray cloud seems like it's gonna come over me. So let's see if it's gonna bring some rain or more wind. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there is rain. And if that moves towards me, I'm going to reef the head sail, because that could bring a tiny squall over with like maybe 10 knots more wind than now. But for now it seems to be moving along the coast. So let's see. I'm getting a few drops of rain. You can see it's raining heavily around well, that's Union Island, actually Chatham Bay. And yeah, I think I'm gonna miss the big part of it. It's definitely raining a lot down there. That's a squall. I'm gonna reef. So I reefed the sails, autopilot is on, I'm just gonna sit inside, wait it's over. There's no reason to be outside in the rain if you don't have to. It usually just takes, what, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes a squall. Alright, squall seems to be over. Yeah, that's sail reef, tiny bit of jib out. Let's pull the jib fully out again. Nice, doing about 6 knots again. One of the reasons we're getting this weather now is because we're in hurricane season and the weather just becomes less stable. That's a nice thing of cruising not in hurricane season, especially in the beginning, that the weather is just a lot more stable and it's less likely to have things like this. As you saw, this did not look like a happy, fun champagne sailing trip, right? This is why many people stick to sailing between the 1st of December and the 1st of June when the weather is more stable. I would recommend starting out the easy way and start sailing in the right time frame. And after that you can decide for yourself what you are comfortable with and what not. Let's say that we just arrived after hurricane season in Grenada, or we spent hurricane season in Grenada, or we left a boat there, or we bought a boat here, whatever, it doesn't matter, but we are starting our trip in Grenada in December when the season just opened and the weather is mostly stable. Now let's look at the bigger picture before continuing this trip. Generally speaking, the wind direction in the first month of the season, being December 1st until around April, is east to north of east, After that it will turn mostly east to south of east. In order to explore the islands up until Martinique, we have to go in the northeast direction, and that is exactly where the general wind is coming from early in the season. And that means that in those first months of the season, there's a high chance that we have to sail upwind, meaning against the wind, to our next destination, until we get to Martinique. And sailing upwind can be quite uncomfortable with a cruising boat. I will explain later why. And if the wind is too much north of east, we either have to tack, or wait for the wind to fully calm down to motor, or wait for a temporary wind shift, because we cannot sail straight into the wind. If you don't fully understand this yet, don't worry, at the end of this video you will. And if you do, I am sorry I over-explain sometimes. I want the person who I was 2 years ago also to fully understand how to sail the East Caribbean after seeing this video. Once we get to Martinique, it gets easier because we are furthest to the east, and our new direction will be mostly sailing northwest. This is often good doable with northeast wind. The second challenge is, once we get north and we want to spend another hurricane season south, now it is probably late May that we want to go back, and now the winds have turned mostly south of east, and it is a challenge going back south. And because the general winds are south of east, even when there's a temporary wind shift to the east or north of east, because the winds have been blowing so much time from the south of east, the swell or the waves will keep coming from the south of east. If you want to know, we call this fetch, which means even though you could sail in a straight line, if you go immediately after a temporary wind shift, you are still fighting the waves because it takes quite a bit of time before the waves will turn its direction. One option to not have this issue is to very early in the season take the northeast wind to go straight to, for an example, say Martin, and then in those first months of the season go back south. The other option is to wait for a temporary weather change and to go more quickly to Martinique and then go slowly north from there. The other option is slowly go north and just wait for temporary weather changes if you want to have a comfortable ride. That is what I did, and that is what most people do, and that is what we are talking about in this video. We are starting our trip in December. As I said, generally speaking, the wind direction in the first months of the season, being December 1st until around April, is north of east. After that it will turn south of east. Now there is a third challenge that I am facing and that you might be facing up until a certain point. If you don't know what the effect of wind on a boat is, I would suggest you also watch the video I made 8 months ago, New Sailboat Owners First Year Full-Time Sailing the Caribbean. The basic rule to be comfortable in the East Caribbean is to go north with wind and waves in the direction to the side of the boat or from behind, anywhere in this direction to the boat. And also to go south with wind and waves to the side of the boat or from behind. If you only understand this concept and you base your weather predictions on this concept, your trip is going to be pretty comfortable, or at least you will understand why your trip was not comfortable. In this video we're looking at an ideal situation, and the further away we go from this ideal situation, the less comfortable our ride will be. Also in this video we're talking about cruising. My definition of cruising is you have a boat that is full with everything you own, solar panels, a dinghy, lots of food, etc. We are not talking about racing a boat where you go out of the harbor with an empty boat and try to get the most speed out of it. It was great fun bashing into the waves with the boat during my yachtmaster training. It was an empty boat, and besides that, I did not own the boat. So it wasn't my problem if something would break. Moving my boat is a different game because I do care, because I have to fix it. In order to move our house, with that I mean our boat, from one location to the next, we'd like it to be somewhat comfortable. Because if it is very uncomfortable, the boat will break faster and we have to spend more hours fixing it. And we really want to spend our time drinking rum out of coconuts and not fixing our boat. During our trip sailing the East Caribbean, the biggest difference in our planning is whether we are sailing in the lee of the island, in the wind protection of the island, or in the channel between the islands. Where we can sail or motor almost every day in the wind protected areas of the islands, sailing between the islands can be absolutely miserable if not planned well. So coming back to the basic rule where I said to be comfortable in the East Caribbean is to go north with wind and waves in the direction to the side of the boat or from behind, anywhere in this direction to the boat. and also to go south with wind and waves to the side of the boat or from behind. This concept counts mostly for sailing in the channels in between the islands and sailing on the windward sides of the island. Not so much when you're just moving in the leeward side of the island. How does a wave actually work? When wind has been blowing for a certain amount of time in one direction, wind creates friction over the surface. The surface of the ocean is the top layer of the ocean, and that friction created by wind creates waves. There's nothing wrong with sailing upwind or against the wind when there's no waves. The main thing that we are trying to avoid with our heavily loaded cruising boats is sailing against moderate to high waves. I've done it many times and it's uncomfortable and wet and stuff is more likely to break. That was a lot of information to digest and I hope you're still following along. Again, I'm sorry if I over-explain, but I want to explain it in a way that I would have understood it myself 2 years ago. Now we get to the third challenge that I am facing and that you might be facing up until a certain point. In this, there is one more difficult term I need to explain, and that is leeway. If I would be driving a car from here to here, and the predicted wind will be predicted on a 90 degrees angle, then that is also where the wind will be. On a boat, when the wind comes from a 90 degrees angle, we call that beam reach, wind to the side of the boat. If I would sail my boat from here to here, and the wind comes perfect from a 90 degrees angle, unlike a car, I would still not be able to go in a straight line. Leeway is the amount by which the wind acting on your boat is pushing you off course. Depending on the wind angle, your boat will have to turn several degrees to windward, meaning towards the wind, to stay on course. So now, instead of having the wind on the beam on the side of the boat, I'm slightly sailing upwind, towards the wind. So even though the weather prediction might have said that with the ground rule for sailing the Caribbean, it would have looked perfect, still in reality I am fighting the wind and waves to go to where I want to go. The challenge I am facing with a boat that has a full keel design, but most of all also because I have older sails that are a bit worn out, is that I am getting a lot of leeway. A newer design boat with new sails will have little leeway, but older boats can have up until about 25% leeway, which means even with this perfect weather prediction, because of my boat designs and my sails, I will experience a certain amount of leeway and I will have to sail more upwind in order to stay on a direct course. And that is what I'm trying to avoid. My easiest point of sail will be when the predicted wind and waves are anywhere from behind the beam, and obviously our sailing becomes easier when our boat is set up to have little leeway. Besides leeway, there is drift. In the Caribbean, because of the wind blowing from east to west, there is a current of about 1 knot going from east to west. When a current pushes you to the left, you have to steer a little to the right in order to stay on a straight line. Because of this, our angle is even more upwind. This is one of the reasons why the Caribbean is not the easiest place to sail. I often feel like half of the time I'm sailing upwind, but if I can, I try to avoid it. So now I've explained a lot of different things and there might be a lot of information in your mind, so let's start the sailing trip and put all this information to practice. As we want to see all the beautiful anchorages, we are going to start our trip on the leeward side of the island. The distance between the islands of the East Caribbean are maximum about 45 nautical miles, but usually only about 25. So if you want, you could sail the whole of the East Caribbean without doing an overnight sail. If you'd like to see a more complicated long distance trip planning, or if you really don't know the basics of sailing yet, I'd recommend you watch my other video, New Sailboat Owners, First Year Full-Time Sailing the Caribbean, before continuing watching this video. The first stop we are going to make is to here, called Grand Mal Bay Inlet, from where we can dinghy over to the underwater sculpture park, where you can swim around and see underwater sculptures. In this video we're only going to stop at a couple different anchorages per country, just to get you familiar with doing this trip yourself. And once you're actually doing it, you can choose which other anchorages you would like to visit. To decide where I want to go, I use the free app Navily. If you zoom into an area and click on one of those anchorages, you can read reviews of what other people liked or didn't like about it. Another app or website that works similar to this is No Foreign Land. Besides this, I really like the Doyle guides of the East Caribbean a lot too. They have online versions of the guides. I will add a link in the description of this video. There are a lot of nice anchorages closer by in Grenada. For an example, the nearby Hog Island, where we can have a barbecue on the beach with other cruisers or go for a nice walk. This is Hog Island. I spent some time here last year. Prickly Bay is on the other side, 2 hills further. It's a really nice place. Every week there are gatherings for cruisers. Now there is the swap meet, and there's a bar, and you can barbecue here. But let's start sailing now. The most basic weather prediction I do is by looking at 1, the predicted wind, 2, the predicted gust, 3, the predicted rain and lightning, 4, the Cape Index, 5, the wave height, and 6, the current. I haven't talked about wave height and period yet. The general rule is that comfortable is when the period in seconds between 2 waves is at least twice the wave height. In East Caribbean, the period between the waves is almost always more than twice the wave height. The biggest factor for comfort here was the amount of wind and from which direction the wind and waves were coming towards the boat. When the waves were straight on the beam, it was most comfortable. When the waves came from behind the beam, it could make the boat roll a bit from left to right. And when the waves came towards the boat, I found it least comfortable. When I choose a weather window to cross a channel, I try to go when the waves are under 2 meters in height, and I just try to avoid upwind sailing as much as I can. I also haven't talked about the Cape Index. Cape is a measure of atmospheric energy. It basically tells you how stable or unstable the atmosphere is. Stable with low Cape, under 1000, and unstable with high Cape, above 1000. That is a general rule. Stable means you can be confident that there is a low chance of squalls, that you more likely will have the forecasted weather wind conditions. Unstable means more chances of squalls and less likely to have the forecasted weather. I'm going to show you on each trip how I personally do my planning, and eventually you can create your own system. I will show you different forecasts so that you get used to the weather apps. I only have 2 sails, a mainsail and a headsail. The weather forecasts will be based on this simple setup of just having a mainsail and a roller furler headsail. No spinnaker or other light weather sails, because even though it would be nice to have, you don't need it per se to do these trips. I don't have one. Half of the trips we are going to do are theoretical, to show you how to do weather planning in the Caribbean, where we talk about what a decent weather window is, what a bad weather window is, and what a great weather window will be. And after we have done half of the trip like this, I am continuing in the other half to tell you what my personal reality was sailing the second half of this trip, in the hope that this both gives you enough information to have a good picture in your mind of how it would be, so you can do it yourself. As I mentioned before, I am adding links to all the routes that I am showing you, so that if you want to, you can look at them in Navionics for free on the internet or on the paid app. I am not sponsored in any way by Navionics. I just happen to use their software ever since I started sailing. I use it on my iPad for navigation and it works perfect. Also, as I mentioned before, I am adding a full route from Grenada to St. Martin, where I stop exactly at the places where I anchored myself. So you can look at this for practice purposes, or you can use this route as a base for your own sailing trips. The whole Caribbean is on the Ayala B system, which means when entering a new place, keep red to your right and green to your left, and when leaving a place, it's of course the opposite, keep green to your right and red to your left. It's almost impossible to do this wrong, because you see a green and a red buoy and you just stay in between them. You should stay close to the right side or starboard side of the buoys, so that you pass the other boats port to port, meaning they pass you on the left side. We're going to pick up anchor, motor out of the Prickly Bay anchorage, and then sail west to the southwesternmost point of Grenada, after which we turn and continue sailing northeast. We're going to look at 1, a decent weather window, 2, a less decent weather window, and 3, a great weather window. Let's start with a decent weather window for Monday. The wind is predicted to be 11 knots from the east to northeast, which is a pretty normal wind direction around December. Right now we're looking at a Monday morning. Normally you would also scroll a couple hours forwards to see if the weather stays the same or is changing in our advantage or disadvantage to decide what time of the day is best to go. In this one-day weather forecast we make together, we assume for now that the weather is going to be similar for the duration of our trip, which outside of hurricane season it often is. If I'm going to scroll back and forth a couple hours at each screen I'm looking at, this is going to be too chaotic for most to understand. I will only do this on the overnight trip we're going to make from Bequia to Martinique. It took me a long time to make sense of all the different prediction screens, and I feel like it's a better start to first understand what is a decent, a bad and a great weather window to choose, and after you understand that, the only thing you have to do is looking at the rest of the day on each screen to see if the weather doesn't happen to negatively change in the duration of your trip. Also, we're only looking at the ECMWF prediction model, which is the European prediction model. For longer trips, I also look at the American GFS model, but in my last year I have only been using the ECMWF model, which seemed most accurate here. The first part of our trip is 3 miles downwind, and then we turn around the southwest corner of Grenada and have to do about 6 miles in the northeast direction. There's not really any point to talk about the 3 miles downwind, as even if you would do nothing, you would not put up any sail, the current and wind will make you float there in an hour or so. The challenge in the Caribbean is not really going from east to west, which is similar with an around the world route, where the wind and waves are generally from behind the beam. The biggest challenge about the Caribbean is every time we go from a west to an east direction, and if there's a way with the current weather conditions to comfortably do that. We start with number 1, the decent weather window. On this Monday, the wind is predicted to be 11 knots east to northeast, and the majority of our trip we have to go in the northeast direction, which means we have to sail upwind. In general, we try to avoid upwind sailing. However, since we are in the wind protection of the island and thus there will be barely any waves, upwind sailing with a normal wind should still be comfortable. The wind gusts are predicted to be 16 knots, which seems pretty good. The rain forecast is really low, almost no rain predicted. Let's look at the Cape Index. The Cape Index is very low, so that means there's a low chance of squalls and we are likely to have the forecasted weather wind conditions. The waves are predicted from the east at 0.9 meters. Because we are on the leeward side of the island, we don't really have to take the wave height in account. Don't worry if all these screens look chaotic to you right now. We are going to make about 12 routes together from Grenada to St. Martin, and I am pretty confident that if you don't totally get it now, at the end you'll get it. In our predictions, we are not going to look much at currents. In the East Caribbean, most of the time currents flow from the east to the west. Here around Grenada, you can see that the east to west current is being stopped by the island. Also, weather apps like these are not really great to see what the actual current does when you are really close to the island. They are more accurate a little further away from the islands. There are 3 things I want to say about currents, which I think you should know before starting out your trip. If we are crossing a channel, and like here, the current will be 0.5 knots from the east to the west. To fight this, we only have to point our boat a little to the right. But if the current would be 1.5 knots, we have to steer a lot more to the right, because the current is pushing us a lot further away from our direction. And if we are already sailing upwind, now we are sailing even more upwind, and our trip will be slower and even less comfortable. The second thing are eddies, these circular things you see here next to Guadeloupe. They are only sometimes there. If they are there the day that we are sailing, we should either try to avoid them or use them in a way that they push us forwards. The third thing to take into account is that very occasionally when we cross a channel, the current goes against the wind direction. If that happens, the current will shorten the length of the wave, making it an uncomfortable ride. Sailing in the East Caribbean compared to the Pacific is already challenging enough to find a comfortable weather window, and if we're going to get picky on every single possible thing, we are never going to get anywhere. As most of the time in the East Caribbean, the currents will not have a massive effect on our trip. I am not always going to look at the current for the trips we are going to do. Once you are comfortable with making the trip plannings yourself, you can later add in to look at the current, just to see that it doesn't happen to be One of those few days where it would happen to greatly affect your trip. Even though this weather window is an upwind sail, it seems like pretty okay weather to go. Now let's look at doing this trip on Friday, a less decent weather window. The wind is from the east with 15 knots, so this already means if we are sailing upwind or against the wind with 5 knots of boat speed, we'll experience 20 knots on the boat, the apparent wind. The gust is up to 23 knots. That's not good. Even though the island will take most of the wind away, if that 23 knots is funneled over one of the mountains, it can be pretty uncomfortable. Now let's look at rain. Even though it's not a major amount of rain, I see the blue color of predicted rain everywhere. The Cape is 700, it's not nothing, but when it's under 1000, it's often seen as good enough. The waves are predicted to be 1.2 meters. Again, it's not so important because in reality they will be a lot smaller as we are in the lee of the island. This does not look like a fun trip. Too much predicted wind and too much cloud cover. Now let's look at the third option, a great weather window. It's predicted to be 11 knots from the southeast, which really would be great for us. And that's a nice beam reach, wind to the side of the boat. Wind gusts are 16 knots, which is perfect too. And now let's look at rain. There's basically no rain predicted. The Cape is 800, which is under 1000, so that's good enough. Waves are 0.7 meters from the east. Again, not so important because it's being cut down by the mountain. This weather window would be perfect, but normally less likely to get in December as the winds are mostly north of east. Let's go back to the first weather window again. The first weather window would have been fine too. We arrive, drop anchor in about 20 feet or 7 meters and take the dinghy over to go see the underwater sculpture park. Now our next trip will be to Ronda Island, an uninhabited island in between the main island of Grenada and Carriacou. This is our first little bit of channel that we sailed through on our trip, and even though this channel is not notorious for being a difficult trip, I'm going to have to explain a few more things now. When the wind blows against one side of the island doesn't just stop the wind. The wind still has to go somewhere. When you're standing on top of the mountain on the windward side, you experience a crazy amount of wind. That's not the real average wind, that's a bunch of wind being pushed against a big mountain and all getting together where you're standing. Why this is important to know is because where often the trees and structures on the islands stop the wind from reaching the other side of the island, some parts of the Caribbean islands are shaped as a funnel, which funnels and accelerates these winds. Which could be, in my personal experience, happen anywhere between 3 and 5 times while you are sailing on the leeward side of the Caribbean islands. Now this funnel effect is not really important when there's only about 15 knots of wind on the windward side, but when there are 20 plus knot winds, it starts to get important. Let me explain why. Because there's light to no wind on the leeward side of the island, you are likely sailing with full sails out. Let me show you a clip of one of my videos about what happens to the boat when a gust comes over. In this scenario it was still a pretty mild gust. I'm back to motor sailing for about 10 minutes because I'm in the lee, in the wind shade of this island. And one of the things this island does is at certain points it funnels wind through. Let me try if I can show you. We gotta wait till a gust is coming and you'll see that suddenly the bow will be like, oh, there we go. Yeah. Oh, the boat's turning. Straight up again. Yeah, so that's one of the challenges that I often have going in the lee of the island. And the only thing I can do is I keep the main reef now because otherwise I get so much force on both sails. The only thing I can do is just, you know, when the gust starts, just release the main sheet so that the boat doesn't turn over all the way. Now I have a 120% head sail, which compared to most other cruising boats is still pretty small. Many have a 130% to 135% head sail. So a friend of mine had brand new sails and the size of his head sail was 135%, a big sail. He was sailing with full sails out along the lee of one of the Caribbean islands while it was blowing 25 plus knots on the windward side, but really calm where he was. And this big gust comes over the mountain, which is pretty similar to what happens when a squall suddenly comes over, which we saw earlier in the clip of the bad weather sailing. It hit his boat and his brand new head sail ripped in two pieces. Not ideal. So while sailing on the leeward side, we want to be mindful of what is happening on the windward side of the island. The second thing on our trip is that we're going to cross the channel, only for a few miles right now. Crossing a channel can be super fun or super miserable. It is here where we need to make wise choices if we want to be comfortable. We're going back to the general rule. The basic rule to be comfortable in the East Caribbean is to go north with wind and waves in the direction to the side of the boat or from behind, anywhere in this direction to the boat, and also to go south with wind and waves to the side of the boat or from behind. Now let's set a general standard for the average boat for what is comfortable weather to cross a channel. Number 1, when the wind and waves are coming from well behind the beam, up until 2-meter waves with the wind up until 20 knots and the gusts up until 25 knots. The reason we can go out in heavier weather when the wind is from behind is because if the wind is 25 knots from behind and our boat speed is 5 knots, then the wind we experience on our boat is 25 minus 5 is 20 knots. This is also called apparent wind. Number 2, when the wind and waves are coming on the beam. Up until 2-meter waves with the wind up until 17 knots and the gusts up until about 20 knots. Number 3, when the wind and waves are coming from towards the beam. The only way for this to be a comfortable ride would be if the waves are substantially lower, below about 1.5 meters, and then with the wind up until 14-15 knots and gusts up until maybe 16 or 17. The reason we need lighter wind is because if there is 15 knots of wind that we go against, we are making 5 knots of boat speed, the wind that we experience on our boat is 15 plus 5 is 20 knots, also called the apparent wind. As I said before, if you want a comfortable ride in a cruising boat, you try to avoid upwind sailing as much as you can in a channel, because in the Caribbean the waves in the channels between the islands are not often very small, and thus we are more likely to have a less comfortable ride. I hope this makes a lot clearer to you. Of course, every boat is a little different, and after practice you can decide what you are willing to go through, but this gives you a good standard of how to look at weather prediction, and these standards are all pretty correct for the majority of boats, which are between 30 and 45 foot, where the lower end of that will be the least comfortable and the higher end the most. Let's pick up anchor and sail along the lee of the main Grenada island to Ronda Island. I will not spend too much attention to the first part of this trip because it will be easy as the waves are cut down by the mountain. The most important reason to look at the weather forecast is for the little bit of open ocean we are going to do. Let's start again with a decent weather window. On Saturday the wind is predicted to be from the east, perhaps very slightly from the southeast with 13 knots. The wind gusts are predicted to be 18 knots. This all seems very good for a weather prediction. There's almost no rain predicted, the Cape is under 1000, so that's good enough, and the waves are predicted to be around a meter from the east. This week the waves are predicted to be pretty low. Because we are sailing partly in a northeast direction, we still have to sail a little bit upwind and against the waves. The current is looking good, it is pushing us with about 1 knot in the right direction. This looks like a pretty decent prediction to take and should be comfortable enough. Now let's look at a less comfortable weather window here on Monday. I do want to note that if you look at the time on Monday, this weather forecast is from Monday 7 p.m. Of course we are not going to start our trip at 7 p.m, but because I only had a 10-day forecast on the Windy app to use to get all my examples from to show you what is a good, a decent and a bad window, I used the time of day where it was just a few knots more or less, so I can make the differences most clear to you. For all these day trips, we are going to assume it is early in the morning when we start. Okay, let's continue with a less decent weather window. On Monday it is predicted to be 15 knots from the northeast, which is exactly the direction we want to go. So we already know by looking at this that it's probably an uncomfortable ride, sailing against the wind and waves through open ocean with our heavily loaded cruising boats. The wind gusts are predicted to be 22 knots from the northeast, which sounds miserable to me, sailing upwind through a channel. There's lots of rain predicted, and you see those lightning signs on the left half of the screen. The more yellow that gets, the bigger chance on lightning. Lots of rain cover on this Monday. This day does not look fun. The Cape is low, so we are likely going to get the predicted forecast. The waves here are only predicted 1.1 meters, which is very low, even though I think you can clearly see this is not a day you want to do this trip. But if you are going to do this trip anyway on this day, then I would say on this upwind trip, if waves would be above 1.5 meters, it would be extra miserable. Now let's look at a great weather window. On this Tuesday, the wind is from the southeast with 12 knots, which means we could sail on a beam reach, wind to the side of the boat, with gusts up to 17 knots. Sounds totally fine to me on a beam reach. The rain forecast looks good with almost no rain predicted. The Cape is under 1,000, so that should be fine too. And again, the waves are low and coming from the east. This, I would say, is a fantastic weather window. However, it is not likely to get many of these windows between December and April, as the wind is most likely to be north of east. I know it's a lot to digest, all these different prediction screens, but don't worry, we're going to do a bunch more together and you'll get the hang of it. We drop anchor at Ronda Island. Ronda Island is an uninhabited island. As I have explained in the other video, new sailboat owners, first year full-time sailing the Caribbean, I have a Mantis M1 anchor, twice the size needed for my boat. And I have never had any issues dragging. However, here at Ronda Island, the ground at many places is like a rock. So it's one of the very few places I had an issue with the anchor not well digging into the ground in the East Caribbean. So you might have to spend some time finding a good spot. You can take the dinghy to the beach for a barbecue. Or take it around the corner to here, where there is a long beach full with coconuts. We are going to sail north to Carriacou to check out of the country. There are a whole bunch of places around Carriacou that you can visit by boat, like Sandy Island and Onslow Roach. But for the sake of this video not becoming 6 hours long, we will stick to around 2 or 3 places per country. And for the rest, mostly talking about the sailing and the sailing formalities in the East Caribbean. Once you understand the global picture, I think it will be easy for you to fill in the small gaps by looking at the No Foreign Land or the Navily app and decide which other places you would like to stop on your way. We pull up anchor and sail around Diamond Island straight to Carriacou. We are going to start with a decent weather window on Saturday. We're looking at the normal wind now. It is predicted to be 12 knots from the east, gusting up to 17 knots. A pretty normal wind direction for December until April, and this is probably the best we're going to get unless we are willing to potentially wait very long. There's no rain forecasted, which is nice. The Cape is under 1,000, which is good too. Most of the time you will see a Cape lower than this. And again, the waves are low and coming from the east. Since this is an upwind sail, I would personally prefer the waves not to be much bigger as around 1.5 meters. Let's look at the current for this prediction. It pushes us up with 1 knot. Nice, we'll go fast. Let's look at option 2, a crab weather window. On this Sunday, the normal wind is predicted to be from the northeast with 17 knots, and the gusts are predicted to be 23 knots. So even if we would only get the predicted 17 knots, if our boat speed is 5 knots, we are fighting the wind and waves with 17 plus 5 is 22 knots. That does not sound fun to me. There is slight rain predicted everywhere, as you see on the light blue color. The Cape is also predicted to be very low, so we are likely going to get the predicted weather. The waves again are very acceptable this week with only 1.1 meters. But they are predicted very much from the northeast, which is exactly the direction we want to go. Let's quickly look at the current. You see that the current pushes us almost with 1 knot from east to west, which means our boat will have to point even more in the upwind direction to stay on its course. This looks like a miserable weather window for my small to medium-sized boat. Let's look at option 3, a fantastic weather window. The normal wind is predicted to be 12 knots from the southeast, not likely to get very often from December to April, only occasionally. With this wind we can sail on a beam reach, wind to the side of the boat, straight to our destination Carriacou. The gusts are up to 17 knots, which is also very acceptable. No rain forecasted, which is fantastic. The Cape index is 640, which is far below 1000. And the waves are predicted to be from the east, slightly southeast. And let's also look at the current here. It is predicted to push us with 0.7 knots in our direction. Fantastic, I wish all my weather forecasts were like this. I would totally take the first weather window, and of course the last weather window, the one we just did, I would immediately take. And the second weather window, no thank you. I am sure I can find something more fun to do in Grenada main island to wait a day. I have gone out enough in wrong weather windows in my life, and I learned sometimes it's better to wait a day. We drop anchor in Carriacou. Again, this is also the exact location I actually dropped anchor with my boat. You can download this route if you wish in the description of this video. In Carriacou we're going to check out of the country, at the same place as we did our check-in on our arrival here. We're continuing to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We need to check into the country in Clifton and Union Islands. We pull up anchor and we sail around the northwest point of Carriacou, between Carriacou and the sister rocks. For this video we are skipping Sandy Island and Onslow Roach, as they are so easy to navigate to. You can do that by yourself once you're here. Then we are going to sail northeast to Clifton. I'm going to do as many weather forecasts until every one of you gets it. Here we go again. Let's start with a decent weather window. It is predicted 11 knots of wind from the east with gusts up to 17 knots. As we are doing an upwind trip, this sounds pretty acceptable for it still to be a fun day. The rain is predicted to be quite low with 0.3 millimeter. The Cape is a little under 700 and thus under 1000, so the weather prediction should be somewhat reliable and the chance of squalls is not too high. The waves are predicted to be 0.9 meters from the east. If this prediction would turn out to be exactly as predicted, it would be quite a comfortable upwind sail. However, if it would be the exact same prediction but with 2-meter waves from the east, maybe because the days before there have been a lot of wind and the waves are still substantial today, then this would have been a much more uncomfortable sail, as we would continuously still be fighting those waves. Now let's look at a crab weather window. On Monday it is predicted to be 13 knots of wind from the northeast, exactly the direction we want to go. More importantly, the gusts are predicted to be 21 knots. And in my experience, on a normal day, the gusts are usually only 4 to 5 knots different from the normal predicted wind. So if there is a lot bigger difference like here, the normal predicted wind is 13 knots and the gusts 21, which is a difference of 8 knots in between, it immediately gives me a warning sign. Let's look further. There's quite a lot of rain predicted. And on the left of the screen you see a lot of rain, potentially with lightning. This will be the reason for the bigger gusts, because all that cloud forming that gives us rain also gives us more wind gusts or little squalls. The Cape index is pretty low, the waves here are again small, 1.1 meters from the east. On this weather window we are sailing into the wind while it is probably raining with more wind gusts than normal. Those are a lot of warning signs for a likely to be shitty day. Let's look at a great weather window now. On this Tuesday the wind comes from the southeast with 15 knots, gusting up until 20. That would be perfect for a trip and would mean we can do the whole trip on a beam reach, wind to the side of the boat. With 0.1 millimeter, there's almost no rain forecasted. The Cape is under 1,000, so the forecast should be somewhat reliable. Waves are 1.1 meters from the east, so we will be fighting the waves as we are sailing northeast, but as they are so small, we will not notice much of it. We arrived! We can drop anchor here or take a mooring buoy. Sometimes people complain about the boat boys who come with a little boat to you trying to sell something. No, I'm okay, thank you, I appreciate it, man. But I'm okay. I didn't have too much issues with that. From here we take the dinghy to shore. We dinghy under a little bridge where the dinghy dock is. And then walk 5 minutes to the Customs and Immigration office. From what I remember, I could only pay in cash in EC dollar. $1 US equals about 3 EC dollar. If you don't have EC dollar already, there are banks on Union Island. You need to do an arrival notification on Sail Clear before arriving, and as always take your clearance from your last port, boat registration and passport. Checking in took me about 30 minutes. Clifton is a lovely town to walk around and have a bite to eat. After clearing in, we're sailing downwind to Chatham Bay. This is only a 5-mile downwind trip to the southwest corner of Union Island, and then once you turn around the corner, you motor or sail into one of the biggest and most quiet anchorages I've been in the East Caribbean. It's an easy trip, there's little to explain about it. Of course, you'll try to avoid going anywhere in days of extreme weather. Chatham Bay is a wide open bay with lots of anchor space and lovely snorkeling. And you can walk up the mountain for a beautiful view. The Grenadines are many small islands where you can anchor. Most famous are the Tobago Keys National Park, Mayru, Canoan and Bequia. They're all close to each other and I would recommend you visit them all. We're going to pick up anchor now and sail to Admiralty Bay in Bequia. A 28-mile trip, which will be about half a day of sailing. It's our second last trip of going in a northeast direction between December and April, where the majority of the wind is from the east to the northeast. After 2 more trips, you will understand the basics of weather prediction, and I'm going to tell a story about how my reality was for the second half of this trip. We're going to start again with a decent weather window, the best one you will probably get early in the season. The wind is from the east with 13 knots gusting up until 17. As you see, the difference between normal wind and gusts is normal again. So that's good. There's no rain predicted, which is probably why the wind and wind gusts are so nicely close to each other. The Cape is 642, so under 1,000, but in the area we are sailing even lower. The waves are predicted to be only 0.9 meters from the east, so even though we are fighting them as we are sailing in an upwind direction, it should be quite comfortable. Let's look at the current here. We are being pushed north with 1 knot. That's fantastic. It should be a fast ride. Let's look at a crab weather window now. I think you might slowly start to expect what you're going to see now. Weather is 15 knots from the northeast, which is exactly the direction we want to go. Gusting up until 24 knots. We see that there's a big difference between normal wind and gust. So besides that we are sailing in a direction the wind comes from, probably there's something else going on like rain. Let's see. Yes, rain and lightning predicted. And you also see some more yellow areas, which means there is a higher chance on lightning. Luckily, when you sail during the non-hurricane season, you will not see too much of this. The Cape is low and the waves are 1.1 meters from the east, which is the only nice thing about this weather window. There are enough warning signs not to go out today. Okay, one more great window to do before we continue to our first overnight sail. Do you already expect what's coming? It is 12 knots, gusting to 17 knots from the southeast, which means we can do this trip on a beam reach. The rain forecast is very low, Cape is 750, a little higher as I prefer, but still under 1,000, so it should be somewhat reliable, this forecast. Waves are 0.9 meters from the east, which is lovely. And let's look at the current. The current is pushing us with almost 1 knot in the right direction. Nice! Now you start to get the hang of this. I'm going to say once more the general rule, which is to go north with wind and waves in the direction to the side of the boat or from behind, anywhere in this direction to the boat, and also to go south with wind and waves to the side of the boat or from behind. The more we go against this rule, the less it's likely our trip will be comfortable. When we turn the corner on the southwest point of Backway towards the anchorage, we are going straight east. We will have to tack or motor these 2 or 3 miles. As we are going almost straight east, this is generally a very slow 2 or 3 miles to do. We drop anchor and we take the dinghy to the dinghy dock and explore the town. This is a floating bar. It is called Admiralty Bay in Bacwa. This is the, I guess you would call it the boulevard of Bacwa. At the end of the boulevard there's a marine shop, which is still closed because it's still early. We're going to check out here and do another weather planning. From shore you walk 5 minutes to the Customs and Immigration office to check out. In Backway there are 2 sailmakers and there are small marine shops on the island, but in Martinique that's where you will find a lot more availability of boat parts. I did not go to St. Vincent main island. I'm still planning to go. Recommended options are, while you're in Backway, to take a cheap ferry from Backway to St. Vincent, or sail to Cumberland Bay, and then a local will tie the back of your boat to a palm tree ashore for a little fee. The reason they do this is because it's a small space, there's not a lot of swinging room, and like this they can get more boats in the bay. From here I went directly to Martinique on an overnight sail. That is the weather prediction we are going to make. In the future I will make a stop in St. Lucia. In case you wish to do so, Rodney Bay on the northwest side of St. Lucia is the place to go. One of the reasons St. Vincent and St. Lucia never developed as much of a cruising destination as other Caribbean islands is because the water around most of the land gets deep very quickly, and because of that there is not a lot of anchorages. I have sailed from Backway to Le Marin and Martinique both on the east and on the west side. We have talked about this earlier. The advantage of sailing on the east side is that we will have consistent wind. At the same time, the advantage of sailing on the west side is that if there is a lot of wind, we are protected from the wind and waves. Let's start making our trip around the east side of St. Vincent and St. Lucia. Now that you are more experienced in weather planning and understand the basics of how to look at weather to choose a weather window, as this is an overnight trip, we are going to look at 3-hour intervals. We are going to discuss only a decent weather window and shortly a crap weather window, although by now I think you can pretty much guess what a crap weather window would look like. Our trip along the east coast of St. Vincent and St. Lucia is 96 miles. The first part of our trip is from the northwest point of Backway to the southeast point of St. Vincent. If you are lucky enough early in the season, we will see a weather window like this. We are leaving on Saturday at 3 p.m. It is about 10 miles to get to the southeast point of St. Vincent. Between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. the wind is predicted to be between 9 and 11 knots, which is a little light. We might have to motor sail, but at least it seems comfortable. The wind gusts are 13 knots at 3 p.m. and 16 knots at 6 p.m. Instead of switching back and forth between time frames between all of the windy screens, let's first look at the rain, cape, waves and current for the whole trip, so that after that we can just focus on the wind. Let's look at the rain from Saturday 3 p.m. to Sunday at noon. That is about the average time we are going to need depending on how fast our boat is. As we see when we go from Saturday 3 p.m. to Sunday noon, there's little rain forecasted, a little bit here and there. Now let's look at the Cape. Starting Saturday at 3 p.m, going to Sunday at noon, it's all around 600 and we don't see any alarm signs that tell us not to go. Let's look at the waves. The waves are from the east, 1.1 meters Saturday at 3 p.m. and 1.3 meters Sunday at noon. So those are predicted to be very low. For the upwind part, up until 1.5 meters, and for the rest up until, let's say, 1.8 meters, I would still see us comfortable. Let's look at the current. The current is flowing from east to west the whole night with around 1 knot, maybe a little less. So this means that if we have to sail upwind, our boat will have to turn a little more into the wind, as we have to counterfight that current to be able to sail in a straight line. Alright, no major alarm bells went off that would tell me not to go. So let's continue with the wind. We're here between 5 and 6 p.m. on Saturday. Between 6 p.m. and 3 a.m. the wind is predicted to be from the east with about 11 to 14 knots of wind. Let's look at the gust. The gust is predicted 15 to 18 knots from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. That would give us about 9 hours. Let's say our boat speed is 5 knots, then that will bring us 45 miles further to here. After that, the wind angle seems to turn a bit more north of east. Now the wind angle is changing a bit more north of east, but that's okay because we have done our easting and the rest of the trip will be mostly north. As you see, only 10 miles more in a slight northeast direction and then about 25 miles more slight northwest. So we have another 35 miles to go to the entrance of Le Marin. 35 miles with a boat speed of 5 knots is about 7 hours. I would say this is probably the best you'll get early in the season. Any prediction that looks worse than this, I would personally not take on the east side of the island. Let's for fun look at a crap weather window. Here on a Monday is blowing 20 knots from the northeast, exactly the direction we want to go, with gusts up to 27 knots, which is a big difference and should tell us something about the weather. There's a lot of rain predicted with lightning. The Cape Index is low, however. The waves are 1.6 to 2.2 meters. And once you see the wave color turn purple, it is most of the time not a good weather to cross a channel in the Caribbean or sail on the windward side of the island. Now if we were to sail on the leeward side of the island, because we're either going to visit one of the anchorages in St. Vincent or St. Lucia, or because we prefer the wind and wave protection from the island, the main difference is going to be that when we get to the lee of the island, we very likely have to motor or motor sail because the mountains of St. Vincent and St. Lucia are very big and will stop most of the wind. The other advantage if we decide to go when the wind is more north of east is that overall it's a few degrees less upwind going along the west side of the island versus going along the east side of the island. One of the things I noticed is that because St. Vincent and St. Lucia are such mountainous islands, they attract a lot of cloud forming, which turns into rain. The rain then sometimes blows out to sea and then we get a little rain squall. All in all, when the wind is predicted to be comfortable and we want to do this trip in an overnight sail, take the windward side for constant wind, and if the wind is predicted to be less comfortable or we want to stop on the way and we don't mind a bit of motoring, the leeward side of the island is the better choice. Another advantage of sailing on the leeward side of the island is that if you're on a schedule or if the weather turns out to be less comfortable as expected, at least on the leeward side, it's only 2 crossings of about 15 to 20 miles of less comfort, before being in the comfort of the island again. Navigating into Le Marin is pretty straightforward. There are a couple of reefs, but the entrance is well marked, and if you wish you can navigate over the navigation lines that I have already made for you that you can download in the link of this description. Of course, I'm not liable for any mistakes or changes that might occur in the years after I publish this video. We are going to drop anchor over here, nice and close to the Leader Price supermarket where you can go to by dinghy. Le Marin is a place with hundreds of boats on anchor or on a mooring buoy. After we drop anchor, we take the dinghy to the main dinghy dock and walk a few minutes to the Capitainerie Marina office to check in. As it's a French island, we check in ourselves on a computer again. There's a marine store here and a sailmaker and bars and restaurants. And we can take the dinghy to another section of Le Marin with more marine stores. And then we can take the dinghy over to another section of Le Marin with even more marine stores. and a variety of other stores. We can go to the dinghy dock of the leader price supermarket. This is the best place in the East Caribbean to stock up on food. It's the cheapest.
I have stocked up with so much food in Martinique because it is so much cheaper in Martinique than the other islands, and also there's a lot of availability here.
And even though Saint Martin is similar and perhaps cheaper in some things, here in Le Marin you can walk with the grocery cart straight to the dinghy dock and load food in your dinghy. From Le Marin we're going to sail to the capital of Martinique, Fort-de-France. When you do this trip yourself, I fully recommend stopping at Saint-Anne, Anse-d'Arlet, Anse-Arlan, and there are many more beautiful anchorages on the way. If you would look at the full route planning that is in the description of this video, that route goes to all those anchorages and also stops exactly where I have anchored. We've done the hard part, we are furthest east. Most of our other sailing trips, the weather prediction will be substantially easier because our general direction is going to be northwest. And because of that, we will be able to sail with most wind predictions this time of year. Most important is going to be looking out for too much wind or rain. I'm going to switch it up now. We've done a lot of theory up until now. I do not present myself as a know-it-all. I don't know it all, but I have done this trip and I can help you on your way by teaching you the basics as I know them, and that will be enough to start doing this yourself. I think by now you understand what a decent, good and bad weather window is, and from now on I want to continue taking you on a journey talking about my personal experience during the rest of the trip. I think that this will be more helpful to you than when I keep talking about a theoretical decent, bad and great weather window. Sailing from Le Marin to the Bay of Fort-de-France. Because it is in the lee of the island, I didn't really bother with what the weather was. But I did check if there wasn't any crazy wind on the windward side of the island, which could give me heavy gusts. I had to sail a little bit upwind the last couple miles inside the Bay of Fort-de-France. Because it's quite a big bay, the wind still has some possibility to build up some waves. Not as much as on the windward side of the island or in the channels, but with heavy wind it can still be quite uncomfortable. On the day I went through the bay, inside the bay it was a full upwind sail, but the wind wasn't much more than 12 knots, so it was quite comfortable. I dropped anchor here in Fort-de-France. Fort-de-France is a nice city to see. You can take the dinghy to here, where there is a marine store called Polymar and also a fuel dock. Keep in mind that fuel in the French islands is expensive. For where I was anchored, we can put our dinghy in front of the big city. If we walk a few minutes to the bus station here, it is very easy to take a very big city bus to Le Lamentin. You will be surprised how big the industry is on the island. There are massive building stores, a big decathlon and much more. First up, decathlon, and then bricolage, building shop on the other side of the street. Martinique and Saint Martin are definitely the two places to stock up on whatever you need, with Guadeloupe as third option. In the other islands is often either more expensive or the availability is less. I haven't talked about phone contracts yet. Many cruisers, including me, have a contract with Digicel in Martinique. I will explain why. Digicel is available in all of the Eastern Caribbean islands. However, only in Martinique you can buy a month-to-month or a yearly plan, which gives you service in every island. When I first arrived, I arrived in Grenada and I bought a Digicel SIM card there. My internet only plan was more expensive there, and also that SIM card would only work in the English speaking islands and not in the French speaking islands. So when I had to buy another SIM card after arriving in Martinique, the first French island I arrived to, I bought a month-to-month plan where for €35 I have 100 gigabytes per month. And the most amount of time I had no internet connection when I was crossing from island to island was maybe 3 or maximum 4 hours. I really enjoy having this contract because once I get closer to a new island, the internet works again and I don't have to go to a cell phone store every time. Plus, my contract also works in Europe and a whole lot of other countries. These contracts are only available at a Digicel store in Martinique. It's a beautiful tropical island with lots of French bakeries. Also important to know is that Martinique, Dominica and Guadeloupe are connected by a big ferry. Besides that, for Europeans, Martinique is by far the cheapest island to fly to. We are going to sail to Saint Pierre now, our last stop, before continuing to Dominica. You can check out of Martinique either at the Marine Store in Fort-de-France, Sea Services Marine Store, or inside the gas station next to where the other marine store Polymar is. Normally you can also check out in Saint Pierre, but opening times at the shop that does check-ins and check-outs there are more limited and sometimes closed for a couple weeks, so I've heard, so I cannot recommend it. But you can ask other cruisers about the current status once you get to Fort-de-France. Even though we are going in a northwest direction, crossing the channel from Martinique to Dominica, these channels can still be quite rough. And at the day I wanted to leave, it also was looking pretty rough. So I checked out of Fort-de-France and decided to sail to Saint Pierre and from there to wait for a good window to cross to Dominica. Now one of the things I know out of experience is that when the weather has been rough for a while in the channel, like you see here, once that weather calms down, it still takes a while before the waves that were created in that long time that the wind was blowing to calm down. So going immediately when it looks good in the weather app would not have been a good idea. However, in theory we can wait for the perfect weather window, but in reality sometimes we have to be somewhere at a certain day, for an example, or our time is running out and we really want to see more places and we accept a bit of discomfort for that. So I had left Fort-de-France in a week that there was quite a bit of wind predicted, like you see here, but on the day I went to Saint Pierre it was just a normal day. On that day, one of the things that happened that I haven't talked about is that I sailed mostly on a west wind to Saint Pierre, which feels really strange because the overall wind comes from the east. You see I'm on a port tag now, which is not normal for the Caribbean. How is that possible? The reason for this is because of something we call a sea breeze. Let's imagine 1,000 little air balls here. What happens is that during the day, the sun heats up the land. Now hot air rises and leaves behind a low pressure system close to the land. Those air balls rise up, but the air always wants to be equal pressure. So if due to warm air rising away from an area there are less air balls there, it has to be filled back up from another area. That air that rises is being blown out to sea. Now if the sea is colder than the land, that air cools down and that air sinks, and then there will be a lot of air balls in one region called a high pressure, and that high pressure air moves towards the low pressure area to create equal pressure again. And because of this we can have localized wind in a total opposite direction as predicted. So I'm waiting out the weather in Saint Pierre and I was in a rush like I always used to be, and really I'm learning not to be anymore. So the morning after, it's the first time the weather looks good again on the app and I decided to leave. So in theory we look at the whole spectrum. Let me do it. Wind looks good, gusts look good for going downwind, there's little rain, capes look good and waves are under 2 meters. But I hadn't really taken in account that when the day before the wind has been blowing really hard, the sea state needs time to calm down. So what happened was I leave in the morning to sail to Dominica. I have my headsail out only as I'm going pretty downwind. So what happens is, because I'm going downwind with like 12 knots of wind and I'm only going like 3 knots of boat speed, and because the waves are quite substantial still, I'm just rolling a lot from left to right over the waves as the wind on my boat is just not strong enough to keep my headsail continuously filled. You could use a spinnaker, I just don't have one, and also as a solo sailor it's just not that easy to use, especially when you're a beginner. So it just turns out to be a slow, uncomfortable ride, but from a prediction perspective, it actually looked like a really great weather window to go. I just hadn't taken into account what had happened the days before. Once you understand the basics of weather planning, now we just have to realize that the reality is often a little different. So we make our best choice and then we just have to be ready for whatever happens. And sometimes when crossing a channel, that means turning around and waiting another day. I arrived in the southwestern point of Dominica and tried to find a place to anchor, but Dominica is very deep. There were mooring buoys, but to me personally the joy of sailing is staying for free on your boat, so I kept looking. I ended up finding a spot where I could anchor in 30 feet deep. I met a fantastic local who lived in front of the anchorage, called Dave, and we had rum together. The boat is over there, and this is the place. The guy who lives here and has a tarp with a nice viewpoint. Did you just bring a couple beers?
Why not? I've been more than beers. I'm a boat captain for many years, and I do whale watching tours in Dominica, not Dominican Republic. Dominica, which is between Martinique and Guadeloupe in the Caribbean.
Thank you, man. Thanks
Yes.
a lot.
I am Dave, Captain Dave.
Captain Dave. If you check in here at the customs at the ferry dock, you can go for a 2-mile dinghy ride to the Champagne Reef. And also visit nearby Rousseau, where I personally really like the architecture. So that is a real cool looking bar, and on the other side is a tourist market. Hello, how are you? Quite a lot of cool buildings here. I am so surprised everywhere I go in Dominica. It's really so much better than I expected. As most people check in and out of Portsmouth, that's where I focus on in this video. The day after I continued to Portsmouth to check in, it was really light weather, so I was sailing or motor sailing with full sails out, and even though on this day there still wasn't a crazy amount of wind on the windward side, still a couple times, maybe 3 to 5 times, I had quite some gusts that were funneled over the mountains, and on this trip I was continuously ready to release the main sheet similar as I did here. Oh, there we go, yeah, oh, the boat's turning. So then I got close to Portsmouth, and then when there's a bay shaped like this, the weather inside the bay can often be locally very different from the rest of the leeward side of the island. And it was. I had to fully sail upwind for about 5 miles, and there were white caps everywhere. A big part of the anchorage area was quite deep, but there was lots of space to anchor in around 25 to 30 feet of depth. We can either take the dinghy to the check-in, or we can take the dinghy to the dinghy dock and walk 1.5 miles or 3 kilometers to the customs check-in place. I walked. It allowed me to get a feeling of what Dominica is like. This seems to be the start of the main town. Local taxi, supermarkets, another local taxi, tourist shops. Make an arrival notification on the SailClear website before. I remember it being around 100 EC or $30 for my 30-foot boat. When you check in, they give you the option to immediately check out again, if you leave within a week. If you plan to stay short, then this is a great option because you don't have to go back to the place to check out again. I stayed for about 2 weeks, so I didn't take the immediate checkout option. I went back to the place. Dominica is known to have one of the most beautiful nature of the East Caribbean islands. It's also a less traveled island, It's not very developed for tourism yet. It is very raw and I like that. On about a 1 mile walk from the dinghy dock, there is a central market over here. There's a market, fruit and vegetable market over here. Across the street, check it out. And a little further is the minibus station, from where you can take a minibus pretty much everywhere inside Dominica for about 3 EC dollar or $1 US. If you didn't stop at the capital Roseau before, I would definitely recommend still going there from here. We're going to continue to Guadeloupe. Between Dominica and Guadeloupe are a couple small islands of Guadeloupe, the Saints Islands to the northwest and Marie Galante to the northeast. Because Marie Galante is so much to the east, it is often easier to first go to the Saints Island, then Pointe-à-Pitre, the capital of Guadeloupe, or to Le Gaucher, and then back to Marie Galante. The Saints Islands are the most visited, and that is where we are going to go now. One thing I didn't mention yet is the growing issues of the amount of sargassum in the Caribbean. And in case you are motoring, it can get stuck around the propeller. To get it loose, you put the motor in reverse and rev it up for a few seconds. Now, when I continued sailing from Dominica to Guadeloupe, it was around Christmas, and there is something called the Christmas trades. It's a couple of days of high winds around Christmas. So normally you wouldn't go, but my friend Keith was in the Saints Islands and I was alone, so I chose to go anyway. So I chose the best time to go, even though I knew it was not really a good time to go. The weather was like this prediction: 15 knots on the beam, 24 knots gusting. The wind turned out to be a little more than predicted, and also a little more north of east. I don't have a screenshot of the current anymore, but it was also at least 1 knot. So because of that, I was sailing fully upwind in about 2-meter waves, which were still there from the last days. I was reefed with a small mainsail and a small headsail, and it turned out to be a very uncomfortable and wet ride, but I got to spend Christmas with my friends. What are we having for breakfast, drink?
Well, this is your mimosa. This is your morning mimosa, which is meant to be orange juice and champagne, but you were classy and got us some sparkling something, but it's close. And so there you go. You get it's a mimosa.
Sparkling Sauvignon Blanc.
Sparkling
that
Sauvignon
was
Blanc.
the best by far that I could get in Dominica. No champagne. Had I been smarter, I would have departed a couple days earlier, before the Christmas trades would have begun. There are only a limited amount of mooring buoys in the Saints Islands, and when I came here around Christmas, it took me a bit of time before I found one. From Islet à Cabrit, we take the dinghy over to the dinghy dock of Terre de Haut, the main touristic island. The ferry is coming in right now from mainland Guadeloupe. This is the big mooring field. Everything is full, I think because of high season. Some local fisher boats, small beach, and then there are some restaurants off the ocean. From here we walk to the Saints multi-services, where we walk up the stairs to check into Guadeloupe ourselves on the computer. It's a French island, so easy check-in again for €2. This is a very cool street, full with restaurants. There are also nice walking trails here. From the Saints Islands, I decided to sail to Le Gaucher, which again is in a northeast direction. As it was still early in the season, the wind was blowing mostly from the northeast. From this point of view, it would look like the big island next to it, Marie Galante, would give me some protection from the waves, but that's not true, it's too far away for that. So I just had to see this trip as any other trip in the Caribbean going in an east direction. The best window I could find was one with about 11 to 13 knots, gusting up until 18 knots from an east direction. I accepted the fact that it was going to be an upwind trip, as I didn't want to wait a couple weeks until it got better, or wait for a day with no wind and just motor. There was a little rain predicted and the cape was a little bit higher than I like it to be, but this is reality and I was ready to move on with my trip. I sailed to Le Gauger. Well, about this trip I would say, I've had better, I've had worse. There's a really nice tropical island, Isle du Gauger here. Alright, let's do this! Park the dinghy. Get some party boats over there. This is the day to go.
Friday afternoon.
Ah. Yeah. A bar over here. The anchorage can be a bit rolly, but if you look well, for a few boats there's always space close to shore where it's not rolly. I would also recommend checking out the capital of Guadeloupe, Pointe-à-Pitre. You can take a bus from Le Gauger to Pointe-à-Pitre, or you can anchor close by with your boat. Pointe-à-Pitre is another interesting city to see. Look at how pretty this bridge looks in the middle of the city. Oh, it's so pretty. Guadeloupe, like Martinique, is one of those places with lots of places to visit by sailboat. There is Sainte-Anne, Saint-François, Ijet-Fajou, Plage Malandure. There are many beach towns to choose from to go to by boat. And it is also worth renting a car and driving around the island. There are lots of beautiful viewpoints and also hiking trails. Of course, as it is French, there are also lots of bakeries and restaurants. I also really enjoyed going to Marie Galante Island too. We're going to continue sailing to the northwest point of Guadeloupe, Des Hat. On the day I went, there was about 15 knots from the northeast, gusting to 20 knots, which is fine as we are going from east to west in a downwind direction. There was little rain predicted and the cape was okay. It was a real easy and comfortable ride where the wind and waves were pushing me in the direction I wanted to go. And then when I got in the lee of the island, there was little wind and I had to motor. I want to look at the currents for this trip. Here you see that there is an eddy. As you see, it is only about 0.3 knots against us, so it's nothing I would worry about. But if I would have done a longer trip, not stopping in Guadeloupe, I would have sailed a little away from Guadeloupe, using the 1 knot current a little away from Guadeloupe to push me north. Obviously, if I would have done a trip in the opposite direction, I would have stayed closer to Guadeloupe because the eddy would have slowed me down. I anchored in Des Hat, where it can be a little crowded because a lot of people here either just come from Antigua or are waiting here for a weather window to go from Antigua or to any other island north. We take the dinghy to the dinghy dock and we walk through the town, and we're going to check out of the country inside a clothing store called Le Pelican. There is a computer for self-checkouts. Do check opening times as they open twice per day for a couple hours. Welcome to a Tuesday morning in Des Hat. There are some people standing at the boulangerie. It is not very crowded at the moment. There's a little tourist shop over there. I hope you're starting to get pretty familiar with route planning now. We're going to make 2 more stops, which is Antigua, and then we sail to Saint Martin, where we already talked about. In this area there are a bunch of other islands. There is Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Eustacia, Ceiba and Barbuda, which is part of Antigua. All wonderful places to visit, but after this video is finished, for those short distances, I think you'll be capable to do the plannings yourself. We're going to sail from Day Head to Antigua. I had to sail to English Harbour, which is again in a slightly northeast direction. I was again on a time schedule because I was going to do my yacht masters there, and the best day to go sailing there was the day before the course of my yacht masters began, so I had to go. The wind was predicted to be 12 knots from a slight northeast angle, which meant that it was going to be an upwind trip. The gusts were predicted to be 24 knots, which is a lot, and normally I would not go out. There was a little rain predicted and also 1.9 meter waves. This is a good time to talk about prediction versus reality. On my trip the wind was lower as expected and those gusts never really came. So what happened was that I was sailing upwind against 2 meter waves and the wind just wasn't strong enough to give my boat some decent speed, and I ended up motor sailing most of the way. 3 miles more to go. The anchorage on the right there, that's what I'm going for. Welcome to Antigua. I needed the engine to help pushing me over those waves. So I had to go to English Harbour because that is where I did my yacht master exam, but we are going to talk about checking in and out of Jolly Harbour because that is what most people do, as it is cheaper there. Antigua is wonderful. If the weather is calm enough, you can also go to Green Island, which is a famous spot for kite surfing. Then you can sail to Falmouth Harbour, where the majority of super yachts are. The number one reason, according to me, to go to Antigua is to see all the super yachts. And there are also wonderful short hiking trails from either Falmouth Harbour or English Harbour. I also really loved going to Carlisle Bay, where you can anchor in front of an expensive resort. I love being for free on anchor with a view of a beautiful, expensive resort. You can put your dinghy under your dock and have fun on the beach. There are also hiking trails. I have checked in and out of Jolly Harbour. Checking in and out of Nelson's Dockyard is up until now by many cruises not recommended because it's more expensive and they charge an extra daily fee. Except for the trip to Green Island, all these trips were either downwind or in the lee of the island and were easy and uncomplicated, and I don't think you need my help anymore for that. In this video I'm going to show you the process of checking in at Jolly Harbour, as that is what most people do. Before checking in you have to make an arrival notification on EC Clear. Do not ask me why Antigua uses EC Clear and most of the other islands uses Sail Clear, I do not know. We take the dinghy over to the Customs and Immigration office. This is Customs. And if you go with the expectation that it will take between 1 and 2 hours, then at least you will not be frustrated. I remember it being around 100 EC or $30 for 3 months. If you need fuel, you can dinghy over to the fuel dock here. Fuel here is one of the cheapest prices in the whole of the East Caribbean. I am currently in St. Kitts, where you can go to on your way to St. Martin if you want to do it all in day trips. I went first to St. Martin on an overnight sail and later to St. Kitts. I really like St. Kitts because in a way it is similar to Dominica. It is not much visited by tourists and still very raw because of that. And then I decided to haul out here to paint my boat and do some other interior work on it. One of the reasons I hauled out here is because the first time when I hauled out the boat was in Guatemala, and most of the time it was either hot or raining, and here I have a beautiful view and a nice breeze. As it's a less traveled island, the amenities are a little less as on, for an example, the neighbor island St. Martin. I will talk about haul out places in the Caribbean in another video. Our last trip is going to be to St. Martin. After checking out at the same place as check-in, we continue the last trip of this video. When I sailed from Antigua to St. Martin, there was this beautiful southeast wind with 12 knots of wind, 18 knots of gusts, no rain, so I thought this is going to be the easiest trip of my life. The wind turned out to be closer to 12 knots or less, and I was sailing only with my headsail out. My boat speed was about 3 to 3.5 knots, and there was not enough wind for me to go faster. Had I had a bigger headsail or a spinnaker, this trip would have been faster. Now a 100-mile trip, which at a boat speed of 5 knots would have taken me 20 hours, and in reality it took me about 30 hours. Not a problem at all, it was just slow. We have extensively talked about St. Martin already, and there are a bunch of anchorages which are really nice to visit around St. Martin. One of the anchorages I personally really enjoyed was Grand Case. Alright, Grand Case, let's check this place out. Looks nice. One more thing I want to mention is that from Marigot and St. Martin, you can also take a ferry to nearby St. Barth or Anquila. You can also go with your own boat, but those two islands are either a bit rolly or very expensive, and the majority of cruisers find a one-day trip enough. Last thing I want to mention is, if you happen to be here at Carnival, make sure to visit it because it's a wonderful party. This video, in combination with the other video that I made, New Sailboat Owners First Year Full-Time Sailing the Caribbean, where I go a little bit more in depth about anchoring in the Caribbean and about hurricane season, should get you quite far on your way doing this yourself. I hope you enjoyed this video. It took me a few years of experience to gather all the information and a couple of weeks to actually make this video. It is for free, I live from donations, and I would hereby like to thank my patrons and other supporters. It is because of you that I can still make these videos. And once again, I'm going to end by saying, if I could do this with no prior boat experience before my 30th birthday, then you can do it too.